Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Painting for Pleasure. Today we're going to end up, well, I don't know what we'll end up doing, but we're going to start doing a scene like this, which is basically some rapids, rocks, all of these beautiful trees in the background. I've been using a black and white shot to work with it, but you can see the value study, basically how it works out. A little bit lighter back here, a lot of haze in the background. We're going to try and shoot for that. A few rocks and so forth. So we're going to sketch it in really quick first. I'm just going to put it up here and start to take a look at it. And basically, if you take a look at it, we're basically about maybe a third bigger than the actual image that we're working with. So it's just proportion. Again, let's go back and take a look at this. The water is 1, 2, 3, about 3.5 times. So if we go 1, 2, 3, we'll bring it down a bit more. It's roughly about in this area here. Okay, just a little bit bigger than that. So this is going to be where our water line is. We have a rock in this area here. Good. A couple of rocks that are right here. Big, huge area. A lot of this is rapid. Water coming down. We'll come around and come down this way. We got this sort of waterfall coming off of here. Maybe a few rocks in this area here. The stuff usually what ends up happening is that the water's coming down this way here. What looks like a snowbank, but I guess this is a winter scene. But we'll see what we're going to do with this. Maybe a nice good sized rock in this area. White water. It's a lot of white water. This is a lot of white water rapids in here. Okay, we have a rock in this area here. And this is our tree line. And if we take a look at the tree line, we have a tree in here, but we got all of this thing. This is going to be all green. Well, it's going to be, but it's all conifer trees. They're all spruce, fir, pine. Well, not like white pine and so forth, but essentially it comes down. So all I'm really doing is just basically coming in here and roughing this in. And my angle, roughly, is this. Okay, and then we got some boughs in here off of a tree, coming off the side, couple of them coming down. And we have the same thing back here. This is all forest. In this area here, it's all the same, but it's going to be foggy. So right here, the V comes down this way. So I'm just roughly, just sort of lightly pencil lining this in so I can get a feel for what I'm doing. And we got off the bank, we're going to have a few trees. These are all pine, and then there's some deciduous trees that are lacking leaves. So it's the winter time. It's the fall or winter, late fall or winter. But let's give it a shot and see where we go. I think what I want to do is to wet the paper, at least wet up all in this area up in here, because this is all like fog. So I have to look at how I'm going to handle this. So let's start with water. We're going to start with the clear water, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet the paper. We'll thoroughly saturate the paper. I might as well saturate the whole paper. I suppose it just makes Makes good sense to do that. I mean, if we're going to end up spraying this a little bit anyway, so we'll wet the paper and then we'll start to lay in some cool. Now, if it's fog, no matter in the wintertime, no matter what happens, what we're gonna end up doing, excuse me, what we're gonna end up doing is doing this on the cool side, pretty much. So let me get a clean palette, and I'll start with the clean palette. Let me show you what I'm doing with my palette. I've got my palette out right about here. Here you go. Alright, so that's my palette. And I've got my colors, blues, reds, and my yellows on that side. And we're going to just wash off the we're going to wash this off so it makes it, we've got a clean palette to start with. So that I can mix my paints correctly. Okay, and we're going to start to put in, what I'm going to start to do is put in a lot of this leafy structure. But I'm going to do it with a very broad feel to it. And we're going to probably end up using this, which is my spray, to help to create that fog. So if we start off with again, I'm going to start off with my flat brush and come in here with my first color, and it's on the cool side. So what I'm going to do basically is take a little bit of lavender. As you can see what I'm doing, I'm mixing a little bit of lavender right now, and I'm going to mix that with a little bit of my cerulean blue. So it's a combination of the two. This is for my background, and then I'll gray it out with a little bit of burnt sienna. But let's get started by just starting to do this. Now, the reason I'm doing it vertically is because I'm looking at the tree line, and the tree line is dominantly vertical. Very strong conifer trees, and they're all on the vertical side. So I just added a little bit of that to it, and I'm coming up from the bottom with a little bit of warmer tones, but closer, by mixing a little bit of my blues. What is that color? Wow. Where did that come from? Gosh, I have a color that I don't know what's on my palette. I got it. Okay, so we'll just, what I did is I just took this turquoise or very strong blue over here, and oh, I know what it is. My gosh, what I did is I had some cerulean blue hue. Now there's a big difference between cerulean blue hue and cerulean blue. It's apples and oranges. The hue has much more pigment in it. It's much different. It's a schminky color. So I'm going to use that right now for some of my foreground where the trees are. Mixing it with a little bit of my burnt sienna, keeping it nice and watery because this is all going to fog out anyway. Everything is going to be in sort of fog, and I'm sort of looking at this thing and I'm saying, okay, what's the real value? It's a little bit more intense than that. A little bit more intense. A little bit of burnt sienna, and you can mix a little bit of, because you're not going to have the hue color that I have. I'm waiting for some colors. I've placed an order for a lot of paint, I'm waiting for them to come in, but I'm using this in the meantime. But I just took a little bit of French ultramarine blue and added it in here with a little bit of my burnt sienna. And I want to get a little bit more intense, closer. And again, I'm keeping this vertical. I'm painting this vertically. And the reason again for it is because the tree lines tend to be on the vertical side. So I can get a feel for value if I just lay some of this in, and I'm laying this in wet into wet. A little bit heavier pigment in certain spots. A little bit heavier pigment in certain spots. For instance, see what I'm doing is I'm just sort of putting little dots of wet into wet in these areas, and to give it a little bit more intensity in certain areas. And that's close to where the value is going to be. That's close, not quite on there. We're not quite there yet, but it's close to where the value is going to be. So I want to get a little bit more pigment. My mixture of French ultramarine blue and my burnt sienna, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove the water from my brush. My brush was wet when I started all of this, and the paper was wet when I started all of this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of my French ultramarine blue and make that gray. You can see here what I'm doing is burnt sienna, pigment-wise, a little heavier, pigment-wise, a little heavier. Right, and I'm going to make that sort of gray, but a little bit more pigment in that. Still some water in it, but pigment. And I removed that pigment. I'm going to remove the water from my brush, and I'm going to start to give this a leafy look by placing my pigment. Well, let's do something else. I'm going to add a little bit more heavier pigment here by adding a little bit more lavender in here just to get. All right, so what I want to do is I want to start to get the feeling of boughs up. My branches, a lot of these branches in the background are going to be moving in the upward direction. So I'm starting at the bottom of where I think the branches start. Starting at the bottom where the branches start and moving in an upward direction with my brush. Okay. For instance, all this area down here, it'll be a little bit heavier. And I'm still using my number 1 brush, my 1-inch brush. But I want to get this thing so that it's a little bit more interesting. Putting more pigment. Now there's again more pigment than water. More pigment than water. Taking the water out of the brush. Picking up pigment, mixing it up so the pigment is a little heavier. Okay, you can see what I'm doing. Let's use a little of the cobalt blue, a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit stronger pigment. And I'm taking the side of the brush a little bit stronger down here, all in this area here. And these are sort of just arbitrary shapes. I'm just trying to balance this out a little bit here. But I want this to be wet. That is, I want to put the pigment into a damper area, but I don't want it to spread all over the place. So I have to use more pigment than water. So I'm using more pigment than water, and I'm making some of this is going to be browner, and some of it's going to be grayer. And we'll let that go right off. I'm going to probably let this go right off into white or a very light area. And I'm coming down now, and I'm going to make this area even darker. A little bit of now cobalt blue, adding cobalt blue to my burnt sienna. And I'm coming in here, and we'll just, again, make this a little bit darker in certain areas. And well, interestingly enough, we're going to just add a little bit of tone down here. Now this area, this area that I'm talking about back here, is all in shadow. Oh, not shadow, but it's in haze. And I'm going to try to do this with a little bit of spray here. See what happens. I want that hazier. And I want some of this stuff up here hazier as well. And spotty. So let's let that go. You're going to see little rivulets that are going to happen in areas. And you're going to see some blossoms, little tiny blossoms that are going to start to appear from the spray. Little tissue. I want to take out some areas, like this area right here. I want that a little bit lighter, a little bit whiter. I want to take out a little bit of a light area right there. I'm going to start to do, with a little bit of tissue, the same thing in here. Okay, and this is all nice and light. And a couple of little spots here and there, and up in here. Not much. If I can get this to work the way I want it to work, spray is cool, because the spray will help. Well, it's maybe a little bit too much spray, but it helps to sort of dissipate the pigment a bit, and it'll soften up a bit more. So while that's while that's wet, that's going to slowly soften. The edges will soften. And we're going to end up taking some of this stuff. Here's the interesting part. Now we've got our tonal value. I want to say pretty much where we want it. I'm going to make some of this darker, actually. But what I want to do before I make it darker is remove some areas that I think need to be removed for, let's say, white birch trees. All right, so let's say we want to put a white light birch tree here. Okay, so I'm taking a wet brush, okay, and I'm coming in here and I'm adding a little bit of water. I'm doing it with this brush. I suppose I could also do it, if I can show you, with a thinner brush. Let's take this brush here. Let's see. Let's say just take some clear water. I can do probably the same thing with just some clear water. It'll give you a general feel for this. Now I just put water in there, but what's going to happen is you're going to see the water is going to sort of wash away a lot of the paint that's in here, and it'll come up with just some interesting tree designs. And I'm not looking for accuracy here because I've got a lot of flexibility. One of the things that's nice about painting this way is that we don't have to worry too much about being accurate, because it doesn't make any difference whether or not we're really drawing that tree out exactly as it is. I mean, it's just, you know, it's foliage, so who knows? We do know that we want characteristic shapes of the trees to be somewhat accurate. That is to say, we want it to look like a tree. And we want it to look like branches off of the tree. And some of this is going to be dark and some of it's going to be light. And we'll just let it go. Let it do let it do what it's going to do. Let it do what it wants to do. Let it paint itself. So if I were going to put in a darker tree, for instance, give you an example. This is still wet. Okay, maybe a couple of darker areas. That's how I would handle it. All right, because it's still foggy out there. So I'm letting this. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see everything. I don't want to see it in detail. What I want to do is I want to just get the general feel of what's going on here. As an example, if we have a light rock there, I don't know why I'm doing it with a small brush. Let me just get a bigger brush. I shouldn't be doing it with that small brush. Because the one thing that we don't want to do is to get too detailed too soon. So we'll just use a larger brush to get in here and build this up. So again, I'll take this little larger brush that I've got and take the water out of the brush, come in here, pick up the paint, pick up the pigment, It's ours to do whatever we want with regard to the color, by the way, of this. But right now I'm just sort of putting in some broad shapes. This is what I was talking about. If you have too small a brush, it gets restrictive. You end up starting to look at trying to put in too much detail too soon, and that doesn't work. You need to get your basics in first, the broader strokes first, okay? That's so important. Big broad strokes. What I'm doing is I'm enhancing this a bit, and I'm using the side of my brush to create that and as I come in here, it might get a little lighter. But again, broad strokes. Let's take this here, for instance. Let's get just a general feel for what's happening right here. Broad strokes. And I'm trying to create the illusion that it's a foggy day. There's fog in the valley. So I'm going to leave that alone. I know that there's stuff over here that we should put in, but I'm going to leave that light. And again, it's a cool day. That is to say, if it's foggy, it's not going to be bright, sunny. You know, you're not going to have... We're talking about symbolic shapes, everybody. We're talking about working our paint with shapes that are indicative or symbolic of the structure that we're trying to create here. Okay, so I'm building this up slowly, and I'm still using the same colors. I haven't moved, I haven't deviated from my colors. I'm using the three colors I'm using are cobalt blue, burnt sienna, four colors: cobalt blue, burnt sienna, French ultramarine blue, and lavender. And those are what I'm working with in order to create this piece. And then we'll bring some of those all in. We'll bring all of that stuff in there. By bringing in, what I mean is we'll create all of these darker limbs and twigs and so forth as they come off. I'm going to come up to the top here a bit more because I've got this, and I think what I'm going to do here is just come right off the page. With that. Try to create that sweep down there. And again, I'm going to go back, a little bit of wet, a little bit of spray, A little bit of wet, a little bit of spray. A little bit of wet, a little bit of spray. Just a tiny bit. So white, my water. My water is going to be all in here. This is going to be all water. Again, it's a cool, by cool painting, I'm not saying, hey, it's, wow, what a great painting. I'm saying it's on the cool side. On the cool side is what I'm dealing with here. Something's coming down from this angle here. And my rock, the only warmth that I'm using so far is the warmth of the burnt sienna. And I want to be very careful about my Schmenke cerulean blue, because it's a little bit different. It's got a different value to it. It's got a more of a peacock tonal value, peacock color value. So I've got a rock that's sitting here, and this is dry down here, by the way. It's drier. And I've got a rock that's sitting about right here. So we'll put those in, and that rock bed is going out there. Okay, now these are just sort of, I'm putting my tones in here. I want that dark there. And on this stuff here, let me do this. Let me lift some light out. Let me come over here and see if I can lighten this up a bit more. I know it's subtle. I know we're talking about a subtle lifting of want that sticking up in that area there. We'll remove that. We're going to remove some light here. And we're going to remove, create a little sharper edge here. Okay. Just create that shape a little bit more interestingly. And let's come back down into this area here and see if we can just take some of this out. If not, we'll just work with it. Alright, soft. So what I'm doing is, this is rapids. These are water rapids, white water. And so in order to create that white water illusion, I want to scrub this a little bit more, make it a little bit softer in certain areas. And I'm losing my tree line. What I'm doing is I'm putting back some of those pretty birch trunks that are here. Birch branches. water. Working with just water now. Okay. So you can start to see this build up a little bit. Let's go back and put a little bit more deeper pigment into some of those rocks. A little dark under there. A little dark under there. It's maybe there's a bit of large boulders or large rocks there, here. Make that darker there. Let's do something there. Well, we'll beef this. Some of these, now, this is going to be relatively a medium valued painting. It's important that we understand that it's a medium valued painting. Light, this is all still wet up here because I had sprayed it, if you remember. And there is foliage. There are trees behind here. This is all nothing. There's no sky there. It's all trees. Just softly putting this stuff in. And again, it's wet, so the paint is literally just blending in where it can with all of the wetness behind it. Now, what I have is I have a dagger brush in front of me here. What I'm using is a dagger brush, which basically means it's a straight side and it's curved coming up to this point here. So I have the ability to do a couple of different things with this brush. One is that I can take and do it a nice broadside dark where I need a nice broadside dark, say like this here. So I'm just sort of beefing up some of these darks a bit more. Or I can take the point and come up with the point of my brush and create some interesting branches or trunks, tree trunks. Here and there. And I'm just lightly touching this. Because bottom line is that we're really playing dark against light in some of these areas here. So what we want to do is to make sure that we have differentiation. It just doesn't all sort of blend together. We want to make sure that we've got some of this is really interesting to look at and shows off our dark areas against the light areas. And remember, this is all conifer trees, so they're all spruce or pine or whatever. And some of this stuff that we're going to put in here, this is all needle-like. We want to make sure that we have at least some characteristics of this needle, like these needle-like trees. We want to create the illusion that what we're looking at is a beautiful pine forest or spruce forest. And we want to give the look, the overall look has got to be that of a spruce forest. Right, so it's important that the outside of this, forget all of the inside, but the outside of it has to look that, has that feel. That's what's going to tell us what kind of a tree we're looking at, right? Now, if we come down here, this is going to be a little bit darker down in this area here. And certain. And if we can do the same thing with this, but we're going to lighten those up a little bit more. All right, because as we're getting more into the foggy area, and with that, I'm just dumping this wet into wet. That was drier into a damp area. This is basically, I'm using a wet brush, picking up wet pigment, and I'm coming in here and just putting in this in. So instead of having a succinct shape that's going to stay there, this is just going to sort of feather out or wash out a little bit, spread out a little bit more, and it'll create the illusion that it's softer and more in that foggy air, in that sort of foggy background. As an example, this here, let's just do, I let that dry too much. Should have gone back in here earlier, but we'll work it out. So you can see it's sort of, you get the feeling of this, all of this foliage in the background, and the fog in the way in the background coming off the mountains, and this is just all hidden. And we'll put in a couple of, like I said, a couple of really defining marks for these trees. And I want to see if I can get this one back. I don't know if I can. A little bit of water. If I can't, what we're going to do is we're going to do it, I'll reverse it out. Instead of white, I'll just put a darker branch in there. See, this is still wet. Now I'm coming over here to a drier area. You see the difference in the mark. When you put wet onto dry, the mark is going to hold. And I want to soften out some of these. I don't want them all to be the same value. I want this softer as it comes down. it's good to have hard edges. Don't misunderstand me. You want hard edges in some areas, but you don't want hard edges all over. You want some of them to be soft. So this is looking pretty good in the background. Just plain water. I'm going to try to put a little bit. It's funny when you do this stuff. Be surprised. There's just little crazy things, like let's say this little line here, and then in this area here it gets darker. It's like a tree falling over. And all of this stuff here that I do is all designed to create that illusion of trees that are in the background. We don't have to define them. We don't know what they are. I mean, it's just a matter of, as long as you see the movement. Some of them are going to be hidden. Some of them are going to be lighter. Some of them are going to be darker. I can see what ends up happening here is that we end up with as this dries, it gets lighter. So if I put in some real darks over here, and we keep this soft, see if I can keep it in here and do this edge a little bit stronger. And there's a slight edge behind this rock. And it's very slight. It's a little bit deeper there. All right, and we'll bring this down a little darker. See, my build is slow. If we want to paint this thing, and we want to paint this thing so it's got some interest in it, make that nice and dark there. Something that's nice and dark there. We have a little edge here. A little dark area there. Sort of the dark side of the rock there. Some dark edges there. Okay. And some darks right here. And a rock that's right there. It's dry down here, so we're just making this. This is just sort of dry brush. Not sort of dry brush, it is dry brush. And water. This water is coming down now. Let's get this wet. Water coming down. Water coming down. water. Water. The water. Moving it back. We'll call this my blue work. Okay, so now we have to start to define a little bit more of the thin branches that are coming off that are a little darker in certain areas. So we'll use some nice strong pigment, French ultramarine blue, mixing with my burnt sienna. But all pigment, a lot of pigment, very little water. And just touching this here, lightly here and there. Okay. Maybe we have one coming up off the bank here. The tree is growing up. We want it to point inward. Okay, all right. Light, light, light. Branches are coming all from the side. The branches are coming all over the place here. Just making these things as thin as I can make them. As we start to do the darks. All right, and we're going to put some darks in here as well. And this is to just help it along a little bit. You want some interesting things that are happening here between these conifers that are in the background or in the foreground, but some of this stuff can be a little darker, a little bit darker here and there. Again, we're creating the illusion. Let's just nothing but an illusion. Alright, and we got some good strong darks here, there. What is it indicative of? Well, maybe a landmass here, coming down, nice like rock there, a little dark there, and probably just one of the things that we need to do is to get this, maybe this shape a little bit different. Alright, and we'll do this. I'm silent because I'm concentrating on trying to create this nice, just general feeling of a lot of these trees in the background. And I'm sort of losing this. I don't want to lose this here. I'm losing this stuff up here. I'll just go back and soften that up a bit and get rid of this. So it's dark over here. Maybe we'll balance a little bit of that dark with maybe a couple of strong darks in this area here, just around this rock here. And maybe this rock a little bit darker here. And let's do this. Create that dark. We'll make this. Tell you what we'll do. We'll do these little tree things. I'm going to put a little bit of something here too. I'm not sure if this is actually working out to be what I want. I want this to be water, and it's soft. It's cold, snowy water. It's, you're dealing with a little bit of snow cover here too. Icy water, I guess. So let's just take this, and we're going to end up putting a little accent color here. Okay. something like this. This will help. So what I use is, this is that cerulean blue hue that I'm using, which is slightly a greenish aqua almost color, just to give you the feeling of maybe some water that's in this area here. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll soften this. Let it come down, soften this here. Alright, and we'll let that dry, and then I'm going to end up probably putting in a few more little marks here and there. Let's make this a little bit, we need something a little bit more stronger here, I think. Okay, and then what we'll do is take that thin brush that I had, my little rigger, and we're going to end up drawing, see, I just put this in, and we'll draw up a couple of tree trunks from that, from here. We know we have a lot of stuff going on over there. Some of those final marks. It's funny, I'm right-handed, so I tend to favor, somebody said this earlier, we were talking about this, and they said in class, and they said that I'm right-handed and I tend to favor my marks on the right side a lot easier than my left side, and that's true. So I suppose one thing that we could do if we had to was turn the paper around so that we have consistency. But you know what, we don't need consistency. What we need is believability. We just want to make sure that we're creating this in a believable fashion. And it's basically, this is all about how, the process of working with fog in the background, because the more in the background this gets, the less you're going to really see. You can't define a lot of that stuff back there. You can define the stuff that's up close, but you can't define the stuff that's in the background. So I hope this is just a nice, clean lesson in creating the illusion of soft fog or rain in the background. I'm scrubbing some of this out. I don't know if it's going to work. Lifting some of this lighter. I don't want it to be. I want it to be arbitrary shape. I don't want it to be a shape that's controlled. I don't want a round shape. What I want is a convincing shape. And you know what? This little accent that I put in here is sort of helpful. Well, let's hope we get something out of this. Get me a dark area here. I want some more branches that are on the dark side. Right in here. And there are buds, sort of little buds on those things too. Coming out of the snow. Anchor it right in that snow and that water right there. Little buds, little. Something that we're missing, right? Now, we got to know, at this point in time, we have to know when to let go, when to stop this, when to say that's enough, because, my God, I could continue to do this forever. And the problem is, if we do that, I'm not sure it's going to work. I'm not sure it's going to benefit anybody. These are light, I'm just doing light, tiny light lines here and there. Okay, so I'm going to let it go. We may come back with this. I'm going to let it set for a while. Look at this. It's already turned on me. I'm going to let it set for a while and then take a look at it later. I'm going to stop this, and if I have to do anything with it, I'm going to bring it back and do it, and then that'll be it. Okay, if not, I'll come back and I'll say hello to you, and I'll say that's it. So remember, the colors, the major colors that I'm using on this are French ultramarine blue. I'm using cobalt blue, lavender, burnt sienna. And the only other thing I put in here with all of this was the tonal value of what I call a peacock color, a blue greenish color, and that happened to be my cerulean blue hue, which was a little bit darker, and it's a schmanky color. It's a little bit more intense. It was given to me because the person who bought it didn't like it, and I understand probably why, but it's a pretty color, but I just to enhance it a little bit. So we'll be back to say goodbye or to add to this at some point. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye. Okay, so as I took a look at this, I'm thinking that it needs a little bit more value in those in the tree areas. All of these areas. So I'm going to just wet the whole thing again. And all the top area. Wet it down. And we're going to end up putting a little bit more value in here. Just not quite enough. So again, we're going to pick up a little bit of cerulean blue this time, cobalt blue this time, a little bit of brown, a lot of pigment, and we're going to end up with a lot of pigment now. Just coming in here and giving it a little bit more value. Just not quite enough. It needs to be a little bit darker. It dried a lot lighter than I had hoped. So we're taking the big brush and just adding some of that blue back there, and making some blue brown a little bit heavier. And I'm just touching it up here and there. Water. And let's see where that takes us. And we're going to come in here and we're going to do a little bit, make some of this area a little bit lighter by water only. And some of this a little bit darker, because now that this is dry, I can sort of define these rocks a little bit more with a little bit of darker area here, and I'm not in a little bit darker edge here. What I'll do is I'll put the dark edges in and then add a little bit of softness to the bottom. Okay, so we're putting the darker edges in. They're sharp along the edge of the rock. Nice dark area here. Okay, and we'll bring it down, soften it by bringing the water up to that area where it's dark, and we'll define some more rock there and soften it up a bit here and there. And let's come in here and do some more defining lines with regard to the water flow. A little bit of, some edges are going to be softer, some of them are going to be harder, but we want a little bit more flow. So we'll just do a couple of couple of line work so that it looks like water's flowing over here. All right, and just some ripples here and there. Okay, so it's a little bit darker, a little bit better, hopefully. And we'll go back in here and go back and put some of that darker, those darker lines in here as soon as that dries up a little bit more. Because now that I did this glaze over here, or this whole thing, I made it a little darker. I need to come back in and add some white light. Take these trees and put them back in. Nice bright okay, a little tree there, one here, let's get this back in here, and maybe a couple of bright spots here and here. Maybe that broke off of that tree there, who knows? Light, a tree, just a few light trees in the background. Let's try something here. What I'm doing is I'm putting in some darker areas, more pigment than water, so that they'll stay pretty much in place. To give it the illusion or the impression. And I've taken a little bit of cerulean blue. And the yellow ochre. So I've added some yellow ochre to my palette. Create a little stronger darks. Actually, the stronger darks are not created with the yellow ochre. The stronger darks are really created with the fact that I'm using more pigment instead of and less water. So the mixture is a little bit of cobalt and cerulean blue with yellow ochre. What we want to do is to create enough darks to give this a little bit better feel. It's just a little bit too weak, I think. I felt anyway it was a little bit too weak. So what we're doing is we're coming in here and creating a little bit more interest in the tree line, I think. A little bit darker here and there. Notice I'm pretty much keeping my head out of this whole thing today. That's a good thing. A little bit darker. A little bit of yellow ochre and cerulean blue. Cobalt blue. I've been using cobalt blue. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. Not cerulean blue, cobalt blue. Yellow ochre and cobalt blue. My apologies, people. Except, actually, you know what? It probably wouldn't make a difference whatever blue you use. It really is not going to make that much of a difference. But I don't have. I just had to order some cerulean blue because I didn't have any here on my palette. All right, so that seems to be a little bit more intense, a little bit better. And then I'm going to take my thin brush and using the same combination of yellow ochre and cobalt blue. I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to go back and put some of these thin lines in. Those thin lines are the trees that are little thin saplings that are back here among all of these other interesting trees that are here. Little saplings. Little green. Sometimes there's stuff, pines are left on here. Needles. We'll break this up a bit here, that white area. So, again, it's a game of dark to light, and making these things more interesting. Doing the linear stuff here now, still. Little yellow ochre. I'm just putting a little bit pasty stuff in here to help this along a little bit. Pasty, I mean a lot of very little water. Yellow ochre only, very little water, almost no water, and pigment. Let me try something here. Let me try a little bit of a little change up in value. And a little change up in the color, just to see what happens. Touch just a touch here and there. Well, it's not quite what I want it to be anyway, so let's go back to my picking up my blue. Cobalt blue. Grade it down a bit. And again, we're going to just come in here and give this a little bit of touch on this side, here and there. Scrape some of this yellow ochre. All right. Long-tailed script brush here, all right, long, just number 5. But again, just going in here and sort of darkening this up a little bit here and there, more pigment. Okay. And just so that we're really comfortable with this, let's go back and a couple of nice sharp edges here around these rocks. little bit of nice, strong dark down here at the bottom. Add a little bit of brown, my burnt sienna, into that. And the same way with combination of my French ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and again need to create that illusion of this good solid tree trunks, and the ones I was using originally were not thick enough, I think. Okay, just making these a bit thicker here and there. Notice what I'm doing is I'm putting them over some of the dark areas. And we're going to do maybe one more, about a thin one right here. And one up. Okay. I think that's it. I think that's it. I think we got it. There's the rocks that are here. Rocks. Right. And we want this value to be a little bit deeper right there in that rock where that water's coming down. All right. Let's see where that goes. I think that should be it. I can continue to do this stuff, but it's just going to get, I don't know, it's just going to get probably worse. hopefully that'll do it. So that's it for now. That's what I've done. Hopefully it works out for you. We'll have to again put it up, take a look at it as it dries out to see where it's at, but I think we're pretty close to where we want to be. So thank you for being with me. I appreciate your time. And again, this is a cool painting with some haze in the background. So let's hope it works out. Thanks, bye-bye. Have a good day.